Shout out to Chargers Unleashed, Sebastian Joseph Day. You know the vibes, we outside.
You're listening to the Chargers Unleashed podcast with your host, Dan Wolkenstein and Jake Hefner.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. Today's show, of course, being brought to you by BUSR, Charger Bolt Family Rock Solid Sports Memorabilia. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, before I get into my intro, I just thought about it right now, literally, as I was done with all that. A lot of people have said to me that during my intro that I speak too fast.
No!
Or they look at your face and they're like, Dan's got that look on his face like, Jake, slow down. Or
no!
Jake just vomited that whole intro out of his mouth.
Fake news.
I'm just trying to get the crap out of the way so we can get to the serious talk.
No! Okay,
merely the only factor for it.
Those optics are totally wrong, by the way. I'm more like, not your optics, what people are saying. Like, I'm more like, let's freaking go. I'm so ready to talk about football. And I'm excited to talk the show with you. So no, it's not.
Maybe I missed my calling. Maybe I should have been one of those auction moderators with as fast as I speak.
100%.
I've done it for a fantasy draft plenty of times for people. I'm like 2240, 340. I've done it like that before. So. No. It could be a benefit in that circumstance.
My face is never wrap it up. I'm always like, I'm so excited. Let's talk football.
Bring everything back to centralization. Sorry for the short tangent to the side. Just something that came to me. Welcome to week one. Special guest that Dan and I have on the show today. He's going to tell you about it in just a second. We are super amped for week one. Obviously, we just had the first game of the season, the Bills and the Rams. The Bills trounced the Rams. First game of the season. That's how you make a statement. That's how you start off regular season. But now, Dan, football's back. Sunday afternoon. We know what's happening. Raiders coming to town. Chargers, SoFi Stadium, week one divisional game. Is there revenge in the air?
Redemption.
I think there just might be.
Redemption song. I just got chills. I'm so freaking ready for football season to start for the Chargers. This 2022 season cannot get here soon enough, and we're on the brink, at the cusp of something special, I feel. And what better way to kind of kick that thing off than to have the guy calling the plays on Sundays or Thursdays or Mondays, depending on what day it is. The one and only Matt Money Smith is going to be joining us here in a bit to talk about kind of where the Chargers are at mentally, where the Chargers are at going into week one, some of the keys to the game, as well as kind of who potentially we could see as breakout candidates, some of which might actually be a surprise. You're seeing the 4th and Staley. Obviously, we've seen Brandon Staley. He's not going to shy away from being aggressive, and neither are we. Use the code UNLEASH, get 25% off any of your swag at LAFB Network shop. Again, use code UNLEASH. 25% off 4th and Staley hats. You got the We're Not Tired. You've got the Hot Takes Cold Beer. You've got the All In. You name it. Jake, over or under how many F-bombs you're going to use on Sunday afternoon? I'm going to go with 7.5. Over, under.
Do you just want to give people money?
I mean, go over. Yeah, bet the over. Trust me.
I was going to say, you're putting me like, what am I all of a sudden, a goody two-shoes schoolboy all of a sudden? I mean, that's a really unfair line to put out there, Dan. I would think that you would have more respect for me. Yeah, that line's going to be much higher. I mean, come on, let's just be honest. It's going to be much higher, whether it's a win or a loss. That line for those, it'll be much higher. So
I will say Jake's text thread on game days are something.
Oh yeah, and it does not matter. It does not matter if I'm yelling them or if it's through text message. But let's be nice, Dan, and let's at least make it fair. So let's put it at 16.5.
16, I'm going over.
I'd still pound the over.
Pound the over.
Anyways, speaking of Betty lines and F-bombs, let's talk about our friends over at BUSR. one of the largest growing sports and race books in the United States right now. Head on over to BUSR, sign up for any new customers right now. They have a promo going on anywhere from $100 to $1,000 deposit. They will match it along with $25 in casino chips that they will tack onto that for you for any new customers joining in. Make sure to use the promo code Unleashed. Tell them Chargers Unleashed sent you. There is a ton of stuff to bet on, especially with college football underway. Obviously, the NFL regular season kicking off in its entirety this Sunday. Go to BUSR right now, sign up, and make yourself some money.
Jake, we're here. We're so close. All right, so without further ado, Matt Money Smith joins Chargers Unleashed. Can't wait for you guys to hear this one. Matt is the best. Seriously, go ahead. If you're not following him already on Instagram and on Twitter, make sure you guys do that. And also, they just put out a new episode on Chargers Weekly, Chris Harry. Highly recommend going and watching that one. But without further ado, Jake, Matt Money Smith joins Chargers Unleashed. Coming up next. Well, we are super excited today. Week 1, Las Vegas Raiders versus the LA Chargers. We have a very special guest who knows just a thing or two about these Los Angeles Chargers. The one and only Matt Money Smith is joining us on Chargers Unleashed to talk about all things Las Vegas Raiders going into week 1. We're going to team expectations, excitement level, the keys of the game. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. Happy Friday. How are you feeling about Chargers football finally being back? You get to cover the games. How does that feel?
A bit overwhelming right now because I'm kind of prepping for 2 games. I'm taking my middle daughter up to college on Tuesday. We got to fly on Wednesday. So I'm kind of already putting together my KC board so I don't get swamped on Monday night. So yeah, I guess, when it's work, you just want to make sure you leave no stone unturned and you're prepared and you've got everything. It's weird because it's hard to watch old games. I've been I watched week 18 again. You can watch the offense, but you really can't just because the right side of the line's now changed. The defense looks nothing like it did last year, so that's kind of worthless. The Raiders offensive line's totally different, but I went back and watched some Chandler Jones pass rush with Arizona. Obviously Max Crosby, we know from firsthand experience in week 18 is a serious problem. But their whole secondary is brand new for the most part. So that's the thing about early season NFL games is they don't look a lot like what, you can prepare to assume they're going to look like because there's just so many unknowns. So I'm excited to watch it, especially after last night and just watching the Bills, which is something that I preached forever, and everyone thought I was just being kind of a hater on the Rams because I'm a Chargers guy. It's like, no, they earned their Super Bowl, but they got lucky. They caught a break because if the Bills or the Chiefs were in that game, they would have beat the absolute hell out of them. And I think we saw that last night, and that's where the whole F them picks kind of comes into play. It's like, and the Chargers will, I think the great thing about the Chargers this year is they finally have depth. Last year they did not have depth in the secondary, and that's probably why they lost 3 of their last 4. So I think it goes to show you how important depth is in this league because the Rams just looked really thin last night.
They did. It was brutal. And man, the Bills look like a wagon.
They're a buzzsaw.
That team, and that's without Tre'Davious White looking like that. I mean, that's insane.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I was pulling for the Rams last night, obviously. I want the Chargers to get the number 1 seed in the AFC. So it's like, no, I want the Rams to win this, but I know what this game's going to look like. And just kind of speaking to that, like that Bills defensive line. I mean, their seconds, their 2s on their defensive line would start for probably 20 teams in the league. I'm not exaggerating. Like their 2s, they're that good up front.
Jake and I were talking about that this morning, actually. We were saying, like, this was almost like a blueprint for what we would hope to see from the Chargers defense, where if they can get home with their pass rush and with the interior defensive pressure, like, this is what it can bring you. And so many opportunities for turnovers, for sacks, for negative plays for the offense. And it was a trip seeing them rushing 4 and getting, 7 sacks? I couldn't believe it.
7. Yeah, and I think, and the interesting thing, and I think there is a parallel between these two teams in that, Tre'Davious White, who's out, and maybe J.C. Jackson will be out, but their safeties are so good. That pairing of Poyer and Hyde is so good, and that's, where we're hoping the Chargers fans and the Chargers are hoping that Nas takes that next step because, if it's as good as we think it could be, like, you could be having that conversation. Hey, who's the best safety tandem in the league? Is it Poyer and Hyde or is it Derwin and Nas? Like, that's so you kind of see why safeties are so important in the league right now and what they can do and the kind of havoc they could wreak, with what those two guys did last night and did all last year.
Well, let's get into it.
Yeah.
I think every Chargers fan, I think everyone covering this team, seeing how the team lost last year, and a lot of people are talking about, oh, last year didn't matter. We aren't focusing on that. Like, honestly, I call it BS. There's no way that they're not thinking about that as they're gearing up for this. For you and DJ in the booth, kind of calling for this game, like, is this game different in terms of like a week one matchup? Like, does this season, does it build? Like, this whole thing just feels so much bigger going into this week one. Is that the same for you guys in the booth? Like, does that affect you guys at all? Like,
I'll be honest, Dan, like, truly, it's a fan thing. Like, the players, they really don't care about last year because so many of them weren't even here. There's so much that changes from each team. Like, and I learned that from successful teams. And I mean, even when I was with the Lakers and they were going for back-to-back championships, they would all say the same thing. They're like, dude, so much changes. Like, each season is compartmentalized into its own thing, win or lose, because it might be coaches, it might be assistants, it might be players. There are so many things that move, and especially especially in football, where there is so much turnover, where you have 5 new starters on defense. You've got guys that'll be out there, and Van Noy and Joseph Day and Johnson and Jackson. They weren't here last year. Like, it doesn't mean anything to them. I think if there's, like, to me, the only person that could affect, honestly, is like a kicker. If you lost a game at zeros and the kicker blew it and they're just kind of thinking about, wow, this has been on my individual shoulders.
I lost
it. It was a 1-man execution, or it was a 3-man execution, long snapper, holder, kicker. We lost that game. We are responsible for losing that game. But there's so, because I brought this up with Chris on the Chargers on weekly podcast. I said, people, they never bring up that Hopkins missed a field goal. Like, they're like, oh, if they hadn't gone for it, there's the 3 points that you needed to win the game. Okay, well, maybe they're going for it because their kicker was maybe having issues that game. The guy missed a field goal that would have given them 3 points. So
very true.
There's just so many things that go on in games like that they really do not carry them over. For us in the booth, I enjoy the Raider games. I love them. I shouldn't say that. I love the divisional games. Like, they're the best. You can feel, and it's not like a, hey, we hate this team fan type of relationship. We just, around the team, this one counts for 2. And so they're worth double. And you feel that, hey, this is a game that is worth double. It is extra important. Because it is that's the one thing you can point to. Hey, is this game more important for everyone? They'll be like, oh, whatever. It's the game this week, and next week's game is as important. It's one of 17. No, these are worth 2 because they're in division, and the easiest way to get into the tournament is to win your division.
So you mentioned there's a difference between fan perspective and folks inside the locker room. We've heard from many folks about kind of the expectations from this team for this year. And a lot of people, Dan Jeremiah come on the show. He said that, he thinks you gave Truth Serum, it's Super Bowl or bust for folks inside that locker room. What are your expectations? Like,
the same,
not necessarily as a fan, but just like covering this team. Like, is it that?
Yeah. I think it's the best roster. I think it's in the conversation as the best roster in the NFL. I think you line this roster up with anyone else, and you look at the Bills last night. I think they, you can, especially with the emergence of Gabe Davis, like, I think you're starting to see, because I think that was the question. Hey, Stephon Diggs is great. Is Gabriel Davis ready to take that next step? Is McKenzie going to be a solid slot option? Can they get a running game going? Like, when you would talk about receiving core, running back, offensive line, I think those all go in favor of the Chargers. When you talk about defensive line, secondary, like, that goes in favor of the Bills. But like, when you're just in that conversation, then yeah, it's Super Bowl. Like, you don't have many of these opportunities, especially with contracts and salary cap and free agency and, player empowerment, where they're just like, no, I don't like the deal. I'm sitting out, trade me. And they get traded, in most cases. Like, I think you have to take advantage of opportunities when everything seemingly lines up, especially because after this year, it's possible that Justin Herbert, and I think what people fail to remember is, Yes, they can do the deal this offseason, this coming offseason, but it won't affect the salary cap right away until that kicks in. So you still have those 2 more years with Herbert on this deal to be able to get this kind of stuff done and sign these big money deals. But I think if it doesn't work, then that's when you start having those tough conversations of, okay, why didn't it work? Is Keenan back? Is Joey back? The people that have been here for a long time, they tend to be the ones with the targets on them where you're talking about resetting or moving on. So that's why I think it is Super Bowl or bust with this group, because when you win, guess what? Everybody gets to stay, unless there's free agents and people come and pluck you away. But, this team is set up to make a multi-year run with the way the contracts are structured. So I think I don't think there's any question that their expectations are, we are good enough to win a Super Bowl and we expect to win a Super Bowl.
Matt, as you had talked about, it's kind of not worth going back to watching the 2018 finale, or excuse me, 2008, week 18 finale, against the Raiders, because both teams just look so different, both offensively and defensively. And with all the overhaul that's been done in this offseason alone, we get a chance to see it kind of come together in training camp. But just from you being out there, your perspective, you and DJ, overall, what did you feel was like the biggest takeaway of training camp practices, the preseason as a whole? How did you feel everything came together with not just the players, but kind of Staley's coaching philosophy and his mentality on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the players. I think that's the majority of where my observations go, Jake, is just, what I saw from the players. And that's, there's a couple things. One, just how big they got, how much bigger they are, defensive line specifically, like Austin Johnson, Sebastian Joseph Day, Khalil Mack. Those guys are big. Like, I'm not saying Chenna was small, but Khalil Mack is big. Like, he is a big, thick, strong dude. And you see that. And when you see, Joseph Day and Johnson lined up next to one another, and then outside of them, and maybe if it's Tillery in there, Morgan Fox in there, and then you see Khalil and Joey, you just look up front and you're like, dude, that is a massive defensive line that you are going to have to try to run through now. And that just wasn't the case, last year. They were playing, look, and I think I liked the energy line more than I liked the starters, to be honest with you. Like, I thought Fehoko and Gaziano and a lot of those guys played their asses off, but these guys are so much bigger. So that's the first thing that jumped out to me. Same with Kyle Van Noy. He's a big dude. He's a big, thick dude. So that stood out to me. I thought Mikey Davis had a really good training camp. I think last year, you kind of felt that sort of, hey, I'm just going to be as positive as I possibly can with this guy. He is really struggling. And that's sort of what I felt like we were getting from Brandon Staley. And this year, I feel like he's legitimately like, hey, man, Mikey came a long way. Like, he's really starting to settle into this scheme and this system, and he knows what's asked of him. And we know he's got the athleticism, the size, so that stood out to me. I think Josh Palmer has clearly taken a step. You can tell that he is just, a shadow to Keenan. They look so, no one's Keenan, but I think you can just kind of see with what Palmer's trying to do.
Yes,
that's something he's really worked on considerably, doing everything he possibly can to try to work his, to have a craft and have an approach like Keenan does.
There was a highlight real quick. There was a highlight I saw of one of the off-season training camp mic'd up stuff, and it just had a pan of just footwork of one of the receivers, and I swore it was Keenan Allen. And then they panned up, and it was Josh Palmer, and I was like, oh,
yeah.
Wow.
I think, and that's, look, we've talked about who's the number 3, and I think if people look, speed is great, and I think people in the AFC West are more affected by speed because of Tyreek Hill and how he has wrecked so many games you've been in for so long, and then it's just one completion and you lose the game. So I totally get that. But I think being able to availability, right? Working your craft so you are open. When Herbert is working his projections and he looks to you, and you are open, that's as important, if not more important, than speed. And I think if Palmer can provide that, and we saw that when he had to step in for Keenan last year, and he had a heck of a game, I think you're talking about 3 guys that can get open at will. Nobody's beaten Mike's 50-50 balls or 80-20 balls. He's just so good at that. And the fact that Keenan is open so regularly because of his route running, if Palmer can contribute to that, well, now you've got, 3 of your 5 options on any given snap are open, or at least you feel like one of them is going to be open. And then who knows what, Everett, and we obviously know what Austin's going to bring to the mix. So that's I'm not worried about the offense. They were top 5 last year and they're better this year. Like, that's the thing. Like, are you better? Did you get better? Did you get worse? Or did you stay static? And to me, the offense is better. Zion's going to be better. Trey McKitty's going to be a year better blocking as a tight end. Austin's healthy, so I think offense fine. So my biggest takeaways were defense and just how much bigger that defense looks now.
And they need it. Because week 1 off the clip, we're going up against the Las Vegas Raiders. So let's get into it. So Las Vegas Raiders coming to town. Chandler Jones new. They've got some new secondary there. Offensive line, you kind of mentioned, is a little bit different. Before we get into like the keys to the game and going up against the Raiders individually, like overall kind of 50-foot view of this Raiders game, like set the stage for us. Like, what do you see as kind of like the macro importance of this game, either individually as a game or for what it means for the season?
Well, I think I think you have to take it as 2 games. I think you have to look ahead to Thursday. They're the road team on a Thursday night game against a team that should have been in the Super Bowl or was legitimately good enough to make the Super Bowl, and just had a terrible second half against the Bengals that prevented them from doing so. A team that is beat up on the Chargers pretty good, although the last couple of years have been a lot more encouraging for certain. They've been tight games, but I think they're at a colossal disadvantage for that game. You're the road team, so you're recovering on Monday. You're probably going to do a walkthrough on Tuesday, and you're traveling on Wednesday. So you got nothing. You got no practice. So it's such a disadvantage for the road team and for the schedule to have lined up where you've got 2 teams that were in the playoffs from your division last year. That's a tough go. So like, that's the macro to me. Now, I think there is a positive to the Thursday night game. We always hear about the toll that it takes on your body and how hard it is to get ready for that game. Well, these guys are still fresh. So it's like you don't have that attrition. You don't have guys that are dealing with so many nagging injuries in week 10 or week 11. And now you're asking them to play a game 4 days later. So I think that's a big benefit. Like, hey, you know what? Yeah, I'd probably rather play the Thursday game early so the Chargers are at full strength. And, we're not dealing with a lot of issues with every single player because it's an NFL season and you just feel like crap by week 5. So to me, that's that's why it's an important game, because I think, I think that Thursday night game is going to be a very tough game for the Chargers to win, just the way that it is laid out in terms of rest and practice and what it means to be a road team on Thursday Night Football.
And Matt, I'd obviously had mentioned, you can't really just take this first week game, comparing it to last year again, because both teams look so different. But just as far as it's been talked about ad nauseum now, as far as just the key things to watch for this game, we've all heard about the Devontae Adams, Derek Carr connection. Obviously, we'll see how that plays if J.C. Jackson ultimately doesn't end up playing. All the new additions that the Chargers have on defense, the Chargers have made some of their own on offense as well. What do you think are some of the biggest keys to this game? And maybe is there one that people should be talking about a little bit more that maybe hasn't been fixated on enough in the game analysis?
Well, I think that, just the last part, of your question is, what kind of offense is Josh McDaniels going to run? He adapted to what and he's so good at that. He adapted to whatever his personnel was in New England. When they had those giant tight ends, they were a tight end heavy offense. When they had those backs and everyone was zigging and running spreads and 3 and 4 wide receivers, they would come out with fullbacks and these giant running backs and run it down your throat. Like, he is really, really good at that. So I don't know what he's going to throw at him, at the Chargers defense. I think one thing's for sure, it's going to be quick passes. Because that's really what I think this game is going to be won or lost on the lines. That Raiders offensive line is easily their weakest point, and it's a serious issue, and they've said as much. So, like, to me, if they can't find their rhythm and Derek Carr can't get comfortable, I think the Chargers can win this game in the first 3 seconds from snap, just because he's not going to be able to operate. But McDaniels is so good. And I just think back to 2018, in the playoff game after they just wrecked the Ravens. Then all of a sudden they go to New England and they can't get home. And Melvin and Joey are just so frustrated and just looking at each other because it's snap pass. And it was over. It's just that there was nothing they could do. So that's kind of what I'm most interested in, is what is this Raiders offense? Because look, it's a good offense. It's those three: Waller, Renfro, and Adams. That's as good of a wide receiver, outside receiver, slot receiver, tight end as there is in the game. So you've got to be able to limit that, to make sure those are short passes. And look, that's what Staley wants. He's got the too high shell, and keep everything in front of you and just make them execute play after play after play after play until they make a mistake, trying to just kind of tick their way down the field. So I think that's probably what I think we're going to see.
If you look at like the keys to victory, right? And I think obviously getting home to Derek Carr is an important one. I think the interior defensive line and being able to stop the run obviously is a huge one. If you were to kind of look at some maybe like statistics or stat lines if you're fast forward to the end of the game, what are some of like the important ones that, I mean, obviously the turnover differential, I think would be the biggest
number one. Yeah.
But other than that, like if the Chargers, if you see the Chargers statistics looking like blank, they probably win or lose this game. Like, is it, if they stop the run, they should be good?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I wish, because each game is so different in terms of like, you're constantly making adjustments to their adjustments. So like I said, because I just don't know what Josh McDaniels is going to do. I really don't. If you
were him, what would you do?
Well, ball's got to come out. Like, ball has got to come out. It's a huge Hunter Renfrow game, and that's where we see, the celebration of the Bryce Callahan signing and how much Brandon Staley loves this guy. It's going to be a big game for him. Renfro's so good. He's super underrated. I think look, I know you said it, but it's turnovers. Like, it is, because I just think the Chargers can create turnovers on Derek Carr. I think you could get that Derwin interception like we had at SoFi last year, when he was targeting Waller and just got flustered because Joey was in his lap and he let that thing fly ill-advised, and Derwin, picked it off, and that was basically the end of the game. So I think it's things like that. I would be really surprised if this was a blowout. I think a lot of people think it might be, just because of the way the lines match up. I just don't see it that way. I do think Herbert can really take advantage of that secondary. And that, to me, I think is maybe the path that you would follow if it were a game that gets out of hand, is the pass protection held up. One side of the defensive end, either Chandler Jones or Max Crosby got nothing done. Whoever was lined up opposite Slater, they were able to provide enough help, or Trey has taken that next step to keep the pocket clean for those downfield developing routes, for those hole shots that Herbert and Lombardi love taking, and they all came through. And look, that kind of happened last year, right? It happened where they were blowing the Raiders out in the first half, and then just some bad miscues. They kind of shot themselves in the foot at the start of the second half and let them back into the game. So we know it's there. Yeah. It's just, and I think it's less box score, Dan, and it's more consistency. Like, you saw that with the Bills last night. The only regular season game we have to focus on. They were pounding the Rams in the first half. It was just self-inflicted mistakes that had that thing where it was score-wise. But when you watch the game, you were like, dude, they are getting whatever they want. And it is a labor for the Rams to get anything done. You could just see that. So I think for me, it's more about that. Like, is it really hard for Derek Carr to stay in the pocket to push this ball downfield? Is it hard? Is it easy for Herbert to pick apart that secondary? Like, that's more of, I think, what I'm excited to see, whether or not that comes through.
Matt, based off of the team as a whole, what we've seen, whether it's guys who have been here for a number of years, whether it's the new additions that have come in through free agency, let's go beyond week one. Let's talk the whole of 2022. Which players do you feel are on the brink of a breakout season?
Well, I think we already talked about Josh Palmer. I think they're very excited about his development and where he is this year compared to where he was last year, especially, like I said, was pressed into filling in for Keenan and performed in that game. So I think that's an obvious one. We've been waiting for Nas. We're seeing, Nas Adderley is there to make the plays. They're just not being made. He's just not getting the picks, securing the football, but it's there. And I think with this pass rush now, with this interior line now, I think there's going to be more of those opportunities. I think he'll take advantage of those. But I'll be honest, like I think the guy whose name we're going to be talking about more, that we probably should talk about more already, but we don't, is Drew Tranquil. Just because he's so good at run fits, he's so good at diagnosing and attacking and processing, that with those guys up front now playing gap and a half with Austin Johnson and Sebastian Joseph Day, and with how good Joey and Khalil are against the run, he's going to be free. Like he's going to be freed up. So I could totally see Drew having a mess of tackles for loss, a couple sacks, some tips at the line of scrimmage as he's flying through the line that lead to intercept. I just think he's going to have one of those types of years, and he's going to make a lot of tackles, as opposed to a safety being your leading tackler. I think Drew, if he's, going to be the starting middle backer, or starting inside backer and kind of that guy that's expected to make all of those plays, I think he could have a really, really big season.
It's not all sunshine and rainbows here, as much as we like to think everything's positive. We do get a little pessimistic at times. We're wrapping up with Matt Money Smith. If you were to kind of give Chargers fans or give the community some things that maybe concern you for the Chargers. A lot of people talking about, what's Kenneth Murray going to look like? Is Storm Norton or Trey Pipkins? Like, is Trey Pipkins the guy? Who's RB2? Is that going to work? Like, what's the thing to look out for? Like, what could possibly be the demise of the Chargers?
Yeah, to me, it's the schedule. It's just you play in the AFC West. These are 4 playoff caliber teams, and they're not all going to make it. A good team that would probably be like a 4 or a 5 seed in the NFC is going to miss the playoffs. And so that's the biggest issue, is you could do everything right. You could play your ass off, and you not only have to play 6 against the AFC West, but you've got to play the NFC West. So now you got to deal with the Rams, who are the defending Super Bowl champs. You got to deal with the 49ers, who are in the championship game. The Cardinals were 10-0 at one point last year, and Kyler Murray is an incredible headache. I think the Colts are going to win the division in the AFC South. You got to deal with them on a Monday Night Football the day after Christmas, when you're leaving your family on Christmas Day again. And we saw how flat the team was in Houston, because nobody wants to do that. It's not fun to travel on Christmas Day and be in another city on Christmas night and wake up the next morning and have to play a football game. So, like, I just look at the schedule and it's daunting. The AFC is a gauntlet, and really good teams are not going to be in the playoffs. So I think that's something to keep in mind, that, yeah, you could play really, really good football and do very little wrong, and you're getting beat by really good teams, especially in the division. There's no, like, to predict a sweep over any of these teams, I think is just kind of crazy. Like, they're really good teams. So that's kind of what I think that would be. It's not individual. They have the players, they have the coaches, they have the schemes. I believe in everything they've got going on that front. I just think other teams are good too. Other teams are really good on their schedule.
Matt Money Smith. You hear him on Sundays with Daniel Jeremiah in the booth calling games for the Chargers. Week 1 versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. Good luck to you and DJ and the team this season. Can't wait to hear all those calls. Week 1 football is back. Can't wait. Sunday. Yeah. Whew. Jake Hefner, Matt Money Smith, Dan Wolkenstein. We'll talk to you guys next time on Chargers Unleashed.